Snow covered the ancient halls of the estate, turning the grand estate in the English countryside into a silent world of silver and shadows. Eleanor stood beside the tall window of their chamber, watching the storm bury the gardens she once loved to walk through with her husband. At 22, she had learned how to carry the weight of a high social title, but she had never learned how to endure the coldness growing between her and Arthur. Arthur, 30 years old, and known throughout the region for his strength and discipline, had always seemed impossible to reach to others. To the public, he was a flawless leader, a man who managed large estates and settled local disputes with a single look. Yet Eleanor had discovered the quiet man hidden beneath the armor of pride. She had seen him smile when no one else was watching, comfort injured staff, and stand awake through the night when she faced danger. Their marriage had begun as an arrangement between powerful families, but neither of them expected affection to grow from obligation. Slowly, Eleanor became the warmth inside his frozen world, and Arthur became the protector who made her feel safe. Their love was not loud or dramatic. It lived in small moments, in shared glances, gentle conversations, and the way he always reached for her hand when they walked through the snowy grounds. But recently, something had changed. Arthur returned from his latest journey to London, distant and silent. He no longer searched for her presence in crowded rooms, no longer asked about her thoughts, or laughed at the stories she told him. The man who once noticed every detail about her now looked at her as if she were a stranger. Eleanor tried to understand his pain, believing something troubled him that he refused to share. She waited patiently, hoping he would trust her enough to speak. She never imagined that his silence was caused by suspicion. Whispers had reached Arthur during his travels. Members of high society claimed that Eleanor was too young to love a man like him. They suggested she only valued the power and wealth attached to his family name. Those rumors awakened old wounds Arthur had buried for years. Before meeting Eleanor, he had trusted people who later betrayed him, learning to hide his heart behind responsibility and control. Even after finding love with her, a part of him feared that happiness was only temporary. Instead of asking for reassurance, Arthur chose another path. He decided to test her loyalty. He convinced himself that if she truly loved him, she would fight to keep their marriage, and if she walked away, then perhaps the rumors had been correct. He failed to understand that love was not something to be measured through pain. On the evening when the storm reached its strongest, Eleanor entered the library and found Arthur standing beside the fireplace. The flames illuminated his face, but they did nothing to soften his expression. She said quietly, "You have been carrying something alone. Please let me help you." He turned toward her, his eyes filled with a conflict she could not understand. "You always believe you can fix everything," he replied. Her heart tightened. "I only want to understand you." For a moment, Arthur almost abandoned his plan. He saw the sincerity in her eyes and remembered every reason he had fallen in love with her. But fear was stronger than honesty. "You want the truth?" he asked. Eleanor nodded. "I no longer believe this marriage can continue." The words struck harder than any wound she had ever suffered. She stared at him, waiting for him to reveal that it was a cruel misunderstanding, waiting for the man she loved to take back the sentence. He did not. "Why?" she whispered. Arthur looked away. "Perhaps we were never what we thought we were." A tear appeared in her eyes, but she refused to let it fall. "After everything we shared, you believe I was pretending. I believe I do not know you anymore." That sentence hurt more than the accusation itself. Eleanor had given him her trust, her loyalty, and her entire heart. She had defended him when others criticized him, choosing him every day, even when the world saw only his status. "I have never asked you for anything except trust," she said softly. Arthur remained silent, and his silence answered everything. Then, with a voice colder than the winter outside, he said the words that would change both their lives. "Pack your bags. This marriage is over." The storm raged against the windows as Eleanor stood motionless. She looked at the man she loved and realized he was not asking her to stay. He was asking her to prove something he should have never doubted. Arthur expected anger, he expected tears, and he expected her to beg him to reconsider. Instead, Eleanor lowered her gaze and gathered the pieces of her shattered heart with quiet dignity. "If that is truly your decision," she said, "then I will respect it." Her calmness frightened him more than any argument could have. "Eleanor," he said, suddenly uncertain, but she stepped back. "I loved you enough to believe in you," she whispered. "I only wish you had loved me enough to believe in me." Those words followed Arthur as she walked away. The door closed behind her, leaving Arthur alone in the silent library. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. He had prepared himself to discover whether Eleanor's love was real, but he never considered the possibility that his own actions would destroy it. Outside, Eleanor walked through the snow without looking back, each step carrying her father from the only home she had ever known. Yet beneath her heartbreak was a painful truth. She could forgive many things, but she could not force someone to trust her. Behind the manor walls, Arthur watched her disappear into the storm, unaware that the woman leaving him was the only person who had ever truly stayed. As the snow continued to fall, he began to understand that he had not tested her loyalty. He had tested the strength of the love he claimed to protect, and he might have lost it forever. Arthur remained by the window, watching the storm swallow her footsteps beneath the endless white silence. He finally understood that pride had disguised itself as protection, and fear had disguised itself as wisdom. Yet the greatest loss was not her departure, but the realization that he had pushed away the one soul who had chosen him without conditions. After Eleanor left, the country house became a place of memories rather than a home. Arthur walked through the silent corridors and noticed every absence she had created. The flowers she arranged were gone, the music she played had stopped, and the warmth she brought to the stone halls seemed impossible to replace. He had expected peace after making his decision, but instead he discovered a loneliness deeper than any hardship he had ever survived. For the first time, Arthur questioned whether he had mistaken fear for certainty. He remembered Eleanor's patience, her kindness toward the staff, and the way she always defended him even when others misunderstood him. She had never demanded his affection or his wealth. She had simply offered him a heart that trusted him completely. Yet he had answered that trust with doubt. Days passed as the winter storm continued outside. Arthur became quieter, but not because he was angry. He was haunted by the moment Eleanor looked at him before leaving. There had been sadness in her eyes, but not hatred, and that hurt him more than anything. She had loved him enough to walk away with dignity. He began searching for the truth behind the rumors that had poisoned his thoughts, and the more he investigated, the more ashamed he became. He discovered that the whispers about Eleanor's intentions had been created by people who envied the bond between them. She had never chased his wealth or position. In fact, she had protected his name. Before leaving, she had quietly handled several matters regarding the estate's tenants. She had prevented a financial dispute from damaging his family's reputation, and had spent nights helping local villagers affected by the harsh winter. She never told Arthur because she did not seek praise. She had only wanted to help the man she loved. The realization struck him painfully. The woman he accused of being disloyal had shown more loyalty than anyone he had ever known. Arthur stood alone in his study, holding the letters that proved her kindness, and felt the weight of his own mistake. He had wanted to test her love, but he had never considered how cruel the test would be. Meanwhile, Eleanor stayed at her family's historic home in Yorkshire, surrounded by familiar rooms and old memories. Her family welcomed her, but they could see the sadness she tried to hide. She smiled when necessary, spoke kindly, and carried herself with grace. Yet every night she remembered Arthur. She missed him, and that was the hardest truth to accept. She still loved the man who had broken her heart. However, she also understood that love could not survive without trust. She refused to return simply because her feelings remained. A marriage required two people willing to protect each other, not one person constantly proving their devotion while the other doubted. As snow covered the English countryside, she began rebuilding her confidence, spending time reading, walking through quiet gardens, and remembering that she was a woman with her own strength and dignity. When Arthur finally arrived at her family's estate, a heavy snowfall covered the path between them. He looked different, not weaker, but humbled. The pride that once surrounded him had faded. Eleanor saw the regret in his eyes before he spoke. "I was wrong," Arthur said. Those 3 words carried more meaning than any grand apology. She remained silent, allowing him to continue. "I thought I was protecting myself," he admitted. "I thought if you fought for me, I would know your love was real. But I was the one who failed you." Eleanor looked away, fighting the emotions rising inside her. "You asked me to prove my loyalty," she said softly, "but you never asked yourself whether you were willing to protect mine." Arthur lowered his gaze because he knew she was right. "I was afraid," he whispered. "I have lost people before. I believed everyone eventually leaves, and so you pushed me away before I had the chance," she replied. His silence confirmed it. For a moment neither spoke. The snow continued falling around them, creating a world where only their pain and honesty existed. "I do not expect forgiveness today," Arthur said. "I only needed you to know the truth." Eleanor studied him carefully. She could see the man she loved beneath the mistakes. He was finally showing the vulnerability he had always hidden, but she needed more than regret. She needed change. Arthur understood that she did not ask him to forget. He only promised to become someone worthy of the trust she once gave him. Before leaving, He placed a small envelope on the table beside her. "I found something that belongs to you," he said. After he departed, Eleanor opened it. Inside was not a letter, but a beautifully designed invitation. Her breath stopped. It was a wedding invitation. Confusion filled her heart because they were already married. She turned the card over and noticed a message written inside. Times, "A new beginning requires a new choice." The meaning slowly became clear. Arthur was not asking her to return to the marriage they had lost. He was asking if they could create something new, something built on honesty rather than obligation. Eleanor held the invitation tightly as tears filled her eyes. For the first time since leaving, she allowed herself to hope, but she also knew that hope alone was not enough. Love had been wounded. Now both of them had to decide whether it could heal. And beneath the endless snow, Eleanor realized that the next chapter of their story would not be about proving love. It would be about choosing it. Arthur returned to his estate carrying a different kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of pride, but the silence of a man waiting for the consequences of his actions. Every room reminded him of Eleanor, and every memory carried a lesson he wished he had learned sooner. He understood that trust was not a gift someone owed him after being hurt. It was something two hearts protected together. If Eleanor returned, he would not demand proof of her devotion. He would spend every day proving his own. Far away, Eleanor looked again at the invitation in her hands. The snow outside continued to fall gentle and endless, as if the world itself was waiting for their answer. She knew forgiveness would take time, but she also knew her heart had never truly stopped loving him. The future remained uncertain, yet for the first time it felt possible beneath the winter sky. The winter morning arrived quietly at the estate, covering the grounds in a blanket of untouched snow. The same gardens that had witnessed heartbreak now waited for a different moment. Candles glowed inside the halls, flowers decorated the pathways, and every detail reflected a promise of renewal rather than a memory of pain. Arthur stood near the entrance of the house watching the snow fall. For once he was not thinking like a man responsible for protecting a public legacy. He was thinking like a man who had almost lost the person who gave his life meaning. The past weeks had changed him. He had spent years believing strength meant never showing fear, building walls around his heart after experiencing betrayal and convincing himself that distance could prevent pain. But Eleanor had shown him the truth. A heart protected from suffering could also be protected from happiness. He had nearly destroyed the only love that had ever reached him. When the car carrying Eleanor arrived, Arthur felt a nervousness he had never experienced before. He had faced difficult professional challenges without hesitation, yet standing before the woman he loved felt like the most important moment of his life. The car door opened, and Eleanor stepped into the snow. She wore a simple but elegant gown, her presence calm and graceful. She was still the same woman Arthur remembered, but something had changed. She was no longer just waiting for approval. She carried herself with confidence, knowing her own worth. Arthur approached her slowly. "Eleanor," he said. She looked at him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "I am glad you came," he finally said. "I came because I wanted to understand what you were offering," she replied. Her honesty reminded him of everything he admired about her. "I am offering a choice," Arthur said. "Not an obligation, not a duty. A choice." The words mattered because they were exactly what he had failed to give her before. The ceremony was not about repairing the past by pretending it never happened. It was about acknowledging the damage and choosing to move forward despite it. Before the guests gathered, Arthur asked Eleanor to walk with him through the snowy garden. The trees stood covered in white, and the quiet surroundings gave them a moment away from the expectations of their social circle. "I need you to know something," Arthur said. Eleanor waited. "When I told you our marriage was over, I thought I was discovering the truth about you. I thought I was protecting myself from being abandoned." He stopped walking and faced her. "But the truth was that I was the one abandoning you." Eleanor's expression softened, but she remained silent. "I hurt you because I was afraid," he continued. "I wanted you to prove you loved me, but I never stopped to consider whether I was making you feel loved." The wind moved gently through the trees. "You cannot test someone's loyalty and expect their heart to remain untouched," Eleanor said. Arthur lowered his head. "I know." Her voice carried sadness but not anger, and that was the part that hurt the most. "What hurt the most," she admitted, "was not that you doubted me. It was that you believed causing me pain would reveal my love." Arthur looked at her with regret. "I would take back those words if I could, but we cannot erase them." She answered, "We can only decide what we do after them." That was the difference between them now. Before, Arthur had wanted control. Now he wanted understanding. They returned to the house where the ceremony began beneath the falling snow. The guests watched as Arthur and Eleanor stood together, not as two public figures fulfilling expectations, but as two people choosing each other again. When Arthur took Eleanor's hands, he did not see someone he needed to keep. He saw a woman he needed to respect. "I once believed love was something that had to be proven," he said, "but you taught me that love is something that must be protected." His eyes filled with emotion. "I cannot promise you that I will never make mistakes," he continued, "but I promise I will never again let fear decide how I treat you." The honesty in his voice reached deeper than any grand declaration. When it was Eleanor's turn, she looked at him for a long moment. "I loved you when you were distant," she said. "I loved you when you were afraid, but I needed you to understand that my love was never weakness." Arthur gently squeezed her hands. "It never was." She smiled slightly. "It was my choice." Those words meant everything. They exchanged their vows beneath the snow, surrounded by the quiet beauty of winter. The same season that had separated them now witnessed their reunion. The cold that once represented loneliness became a symbol of endurance. When they were finally married again, the local church bells rang across the valley. Later, as they walked through the gardens, Arthur noticed Eleanor looking at the snow-covered paths. "Do you remember this place?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "I remember walking here when I thought I had lost everything." Arthur's expression changed. "I am sorry." Eleanor looked at him. "I know." That simple answer showed how far they had come. She did not dismiss his mistake, but she no longer carried the pain alone. Arthur took her hand. "I spent so much time fearing you would leave that I never realized I was the reason you might." Eleanor leaned closer to him. "Fear can make people destroy the things they love most." Arthur nodded. "And pride can make them refuse to admit it." Together they continued walking beneath the snow. Their story was not perfect. They would still face disagreements, misunderstandings, and difficult days. But now they had learned the lesson that mattered most. Love could not survive through suspicion. A partner's loyalty should never be questioned through cruelty or impossible tests. Trust was not something demanded. It was something built through patience, honesty, and care. Arthur had once believed that strength meant hiding his fears. Eleanor had taught him that true strength was admitting them. The years ahead would bring many seasons to the estate, but every winter would remind them of the moment they almost lost each other and the choice they made instead. As the snow continued falling around them, Arthur held Eleanor's hand and smiled. This time he was not afraid of losing her, not because he had proven her love, but because he had finally learned how to cherish it. If this story of love, trust, and second chances moved, you please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt tales. What do you think is the biggest lesson Arthur learned about trust? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a conversation.